Well, hi everyone. Our work in China includes caring for North Korean orphans, and because of this, we get asked quite frequently whether it is possible to adopt a North Korean orphan. The short answer to this question is that adopting a North Korean orphan is virtually impossible, but the answer is complicated and deserves further examination. In this video, we will cover 3 different factors that impact this issue. First, there is the legal framework that needs to exist between an orphan's country of origin and his destination country. Second, I will explain the many different countries of origin a North Korean orphan can be from and how each of these contexts pose different challenges for North Korean children. And finally, we will look at what changes need to take place to make adopting a North Korean child a reality. Hi, I'm Dan Chung and I'm Executive Director and co-founder of Crossing Borders. We've been helping North Korean refugees and orphans since 2003, and it has been the privilege of my life to be a part of this work. We have helped thousands of North Korean refugees and orphans in China and pray that we can continue this dangerous work for years to come. Okay, let's talk about the law. It's important to start here because laws are the backbone behind any adoption process, especially international adoptions. It gets pretty technical, but the basic idea behind these laws is that there has to be some way of proving behind a shadow of a doubt that a child has legally been abandoned by their parents and put up for adoption. And if the adoption is international, the 2 countries must then agree on what standards must exist in order to make that adoption a reality. The issue both countries want to avoid is sending a child overseas to a new family and realizing later that the parent never actually or legally abdicated their rights and tried to get the child back. This happens more often than one might think. Additionally, in order to have a child adopted from country A to country B, the first necessary step the 2 countries must take is to establish an official diplomatic relationship. Then the 2 countries must agree on what legal paperwork and procedures must be present in order to execute the actual adoption. North Korean orphans fall into 3 broad categories. First, those who live in North Korea. Second, those who escaped unaccompanied into China. And last, those who were born in China. Let's start with orphans who were born in and currently live in North Korea. Right now, North Korea does not allow foreign adoption. In fact, they have a long history of criticizing South Korea for its policies around international adoption. Here's a clip from an interview with Steve Morrison, the founder of Mission to Promote the Adoption of Kids, or MPAC.
Right now, because the North Korean government has not approved those children to be adopted or infrastructure built in within North Korea to facilitate that kind of adoption. So there is no way for any families outside North Korea to adopt.
Even if North Korea did allow international adoptions, they do not have official diplomatic relations with many countries, especially the US. Second, what about North Korean children who escape into China? Well, currently, China does not acknowledge any North Korean who crosses into its borders as a refugee. They receive no protection or statehood from China, and this applies even to the most vulnerable orphan who comes in from North Korea. And because these children are given no ID and no official designation other than illegal economic migrant, this means that there is no legal designation that would make these children legally adoptable. Finally, what about the children in Crossing Borders network? These children are often the result of the trafficking of North Korean women into China and are half North Korean and half Chinese. Most do not have legal identification. Again, for the children who do not have legal ID, there would be no way for the Chinese government to then give them any sort of legal process in order to get them adopted. They have no papers. For the children who do have identification, since their North Korean birth mothers do not have legal status, well, there's no way for their mothers to legally say that they would like to give their children up for adoption. The US government passed a law declaring the adoption of half North Korean, half Chinese orphans adoptable in the US in 2011. It was called the North Korean Refugee Adoption Act. And here's Steve Morrison's thought on this.
This bill allows US citizens to adopt those children. However, it's been 9 years since the passage of the law, and hardly anything has happened, unfortunately. So the bill allowed exploring the possibility or developing mechanism to have those children be able to be adopted from outside of North Korea, children living outside of North Korea. And so far, not much has been done, and it's very sad. I think the U.S. Senate and the government needs to revisit this act, S416, and really make a concerted effort to make it a reality by working with other countries. I think U.S. probably tried with China to make this happen, but Chinese government is probably not cooperating. Right. And because they're more interested in keeping the children and repatriating captured North Koreans back to North Korea. And maybe their fear is that these children may someday be reunited. I don't know. But the reality is all these children are growing up without parents as an orphan.
But what about the children who make it out of China through the Underground Railroad to a country where they can receive refugee status? This is the only case where there is a glimmer of hope, albeit a very slim one. There would have to be some way for these children to prove their parents are either deceased or have legally abdicated their parental rights. But how can children do that if their mothers are illegal immigrants in China or still back in North Korea? The only way that it's possible for a child to come through the Underground Railroad to a country like Thailand with their parents, and for their parents to then legally abdicate their rights as their legal guardians. This is a long shot. So what can be done here? Many like-minded people, including those of us at Crossing Borders, would like to see North Korean orphans become eligible for adoption. But how? Steve Morrison has decided to devote some time to this.
Refugees, they escape to China or find their way down, all the way down to Vietnam or Thailand. And once they get into a South Korean embassy, they're given a escape to South Korea, right? Yes. And the thing is that when those children go to South Korea, the Act 416 also allows looking into building up the mechanism on how to facilitate adoption for those North Korean children that could be adopted. And seriously, I don't know what the hang-up is. That's not happening. And that's something that I would like to take it to South Korea after I retire and visit there and try to find an issue with this. Why isn't this happening? Our contact State Department and see where are you guys on this? And who's pushing for this? Why isn't this in place? It's been 9 years. And I'd like to find out more on that issue. See if there's a way for North Korean escaped children in South Korea can be adopted by U.S. parents.
Although adopting North Korean orphans isn't possible, there are some situations where we might be able to see this law turn into a practical reality. But it will take advocates like Steve Morrison and MPAC pushing Congress to see this through. And if North Korean orphans living in a country that grants them refugee status can legally be adopted, well, perhaps then that first domino will lead many other countries to follow suit. We can only hope and pray.